I'm talking about the book, The Wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach, sometimes called Jesus ben Sirach, which simply means Jesus of, whose father was called Sirach, which is a book in the Apocrypha. It's a book that's sometimes known as Ecclesiasticus, and it was given that label in the early church, Liber Ecclesiasticus, a church book. And the reason it was called Ecclesiasticus, a church book, is because it was read in church a lot. It's as simple as that.
So we are looking on a book which is called Ecclesiasticus, or The Wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach, or Sirach. And the Hebrew name would be Ben Sirach, again the son of Sirach. This is a wisdom book, very similar to Proverbs in the Bible and clearly inspired by the book of Proverbs in the Bible.
And this book was written around 180 BC, so a couple of hundred years before the life of Christ, by a character known as Jesus, a very common name amongst Jews of this period. And it was written probably in Hebrew, maybe in Egypt, it's not quite clear. But it is a book about ethical teaching, about how we deal with each other, particularly with the poor.
And what he's trying to do is to give a manual for high society young lads how to behave properly, privately and in public. So it's a kind of manual for Eton people, how to make it into society and how to make impact.
We've got teachings in Ecclesiasticus about the wisdom of Ben Sirach, about the poor, and a lot of these teachings are extremely beautiful. And here's an example. So this is from chapter 4 of Sirach. My child, do not cheat the poor of their living, and do not keep needy eyes waiting. Do not grieve the hungry or anger one in need.
Of course, it's based on biblical material, but it's what we discussed in First Maccabees. It's clearly applying the biblical material to a completely new cultural situation. So now we have Greek wisdom, we have Greek philosophy, and the Jews are in a disadvantage. They just have the Torah. And what is Ben Sirach doing is in a way to make clear all what you can find by the Greeks is already in the Torah. So the Torah is the better wisdom, is the real wisdom.
The writer, Jesus, son of Sirach, talks also about duties towards parents, humility. He talks about friendship, about telling the truth and not lies.
So it's one chapter in Sirach which I think is important, because this is a chapter on physicians and an advice that you should not ignore the advice and the help of the physicians. So it's in chapter 38, honor physicians for their services, for the Lord created them. So then he makes a kind of argument, if you are ill, you should do two things. You should pray and bring sacrifices and do a kind of religious practice to see if your illness is related to sin, which is a traditional concept in this time. But then, the second one, then give the physician his place. Again, for the Lord created him. Do not let him leave you, for you need him. So a kind of advice, take kind of worldly help as well.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yes, exactly. But again, his appreciation for the arts of the physician is limited, because at the end of this chapter he makes clear to fall in the hands of the physician is a kind of punishment by God. He who sins against his maker will be defiant toward the physician.
This is basically a book of wise sayings and teachings about how we live with each other and live peacefully. And for that reason it becomes very, very popular in church communities. And of course a lot of the teaching here, for example the passage I just read about the poor, is reflected in the Gospels and the teachings of Jesus. So you can already see that, as it were, Christian ethics has got its foundation in this Greek-Jewish tradition 300 years before Christ.
It's clearly dated, so it's written about 180 BCE, in the time when, in peaceful times in Jerusalem, and the author introduces himself in chapter 50, says that he is the son of Eleazar, son of Sirach, and that he traveled a lot, obviously, that he has seen a lot, and that he wants to condense his wisdom and bring it into a book for the sake of the future generations.
It's not clear whether he compiled these sayings from many different sources, but a lot of scholars think that he did in fact write the whole thing himself in Hebrew. And the text, it's an appendix to the text, says that it was translated into Greek by the author's grandson.
The grandson of the author of this book translated the book of his grandfather about 50 years later into Greek. And he has given a kind of preface or prologue to his translation and explained a bit why his grandfather has written this. So for the first time we see the production process of a kind of biblical book.
And for a good period of time we only had access to the Greek text. But a Hebrew text is attested to by Jerome, for example, the translator of the Bible into Latin. And in fact, fragments of the Hebrew manuscript have been found more recently in the 19th century.
For a theologian like you, are these apocryphal books like Sirach less useful, less important than the books that are in the main canon?
No. Or yes and no. So there's always, within the Christian tradition, the strong idea these books are very helpful to read. They are helpful for Christians to understand what they should do. So there's always an encouragement to read this book. They were used even for sermons and so on. But you should not derive doctrine from them. So from their doctrinal quality, they are in a way a little bit secondary to the undisputed books of the Bible.
But the author is quite clearly aware of much wider traditions of thought and the Hellenistic, the Greek world. And in fact, he describes the ideal scribe as the one who travels abroad, who knows the lands and the traditions and the philosophies of other people around the Mediterranean world. So it's not a kind of parochial book at all.
And a real disadvantage of the book is that it's quite hostile towards women. So it's Ben Sira was obviously a kind of misogynist. So he sees women responsible for a lot of evil. So therefore, we are quite happy that this is not canonical in the very strong sense.